Welcome to a radical discussion of independence, free will, liberty, and the left-hand path. This is Daimonosophy, your host, Paul Frederick. Welcome, my friends and fellow daemons, to Saturnian sessions on Daimonosophy, where we explore the groovy dark vibes that descend upon those who stay up too late on a Saturday night. And tonight, our friend Koyote the Blind joins us again to talk about his new book, Teachings of a Toltec Survivor, which is really awesome. So, Koyote, welcome back to the show. And how's it going?
It's going great. How's it going with you?
Awesome. I'm doing very good. So, tonight, before I got involved with this, I was watching the movie The First Man.
Oh.
Which is, I don't know if you've seen it. It's about, okay, so it's a fairly recent film that's about it's the life story of Neil Armstrong, first man in space and man on the moon and stuff like that. And the whole movie, it's like his whole career going on this, Gemini 8 project and other things, getting involved with being an astronaut and, NASA and the Secret Service and all this. And the whole thing, of course, is culminating in the moon.
Right.
As the final cause. And as I was coming to have this conversation with you, I was thinking about the moon. And this is one of the things that comes up in your book, is this cosmology of the moon being this final possibility or a final destination for one current of life.
Yes.
So with that, tell me about the moon and tell me about your book.
Well, yes, it's from an understanding of creation or the cosmos that really starts from sentience, the sentience of the absolute, if you will, that unfolds, like the opening of a flower, and the last point of unfolding or manifestation is matter. Okay, not just matter, but the densest of matter. Think of it as a black hole, actually, type of where matter has been compressed to the lowest. But at some point before that ultimate compression of matter, there is a pullback, okay, where out of matter we develop structured complexities, structured molecular patterns and complexities that give way to life, planetary life, and from life, complex organisms, out of which we have mind. So in this view, consciousness and mind are not, or actually sentience and mind are not equivalent. Mind is developed from the complexity of organisms that have life in them. The human being is one of these creatures that have evolved with complex nervous systems and brains capable of forming a mind. And through this mind, the cosmic sentience is experiencing many lifetimes, lifetime after lifetime. So you have two concentric and circles of manifestation. One that comes from the primary sentience of the Godhead into manifested life, and then the other one that goes from life back to the primordial Godhead. So the analogy of the moon as the last recipient of the light of sentience would be, it's like an analogy, um, a symbolism of the unconscious mind, okay? Which is, it's only really unconscious because the conscious part of us cannot really encompass that vastness of the dream world, of the unconscious, and that is ruled by the Queen of Heaven or the Moon. So that's where that cosmogony originates from. And so as creatures that seek evolution, conscious evolution, awakening and enlightenment, we seek to illuminate the moon, which is to say, to make conscious that which is naturally unconscious, and to expand the level of awareness that we have from the small ego or chatter of the personality, chatterbox in the personality, allow the vastness of the human mind to operate through us. It is also assuming that we are not really a collection of individual minds, but that we are more like individual antennas that tap into the human mind, the egregore of humanity. And we become individual expressions of the human being, which is to say, really individual expressions of the Godhead that has incarnated as a human being.
And Aristotle says that with the forms, the whole concept of the forms, that the ultimate expression of a form is that individualized expression, that unique expression of it. That's the final, or not the final, but a defining aspect of the form coming into being. The expression through an individual.
Plato starts the Socratic dialogues where he creates the analogy of a city, right? And the city, it's really, many people get confused at this point, but because they believe that he is proposing some sort of political perfection, but he's really talking about the structure of the human being with this. And at the apex of this city, which is to say the human being, is the philosopher king. And so the philosopher king in this case is not an aristocratic individual that rules over others. It is the illuminated self, the self that has become conscious and a manifestation of the logos and the lover of wisdom that can then put this city in order.
Right, self-rulership is what I think of. To me, that's the key of Philosopher King, and where there's that potential of misunderstanding
it's the autocracy, really.
Right, it's like pure. It's an expression of pure sovereignty, like total self-rulership rather than rulership over others. Because rulership over others always tends to lead down this other path. It's like a different pursuit from self-enlightenment.
Well, rulership over others, whether it's an individual ruling or a group ruling, always assumes that the human being is a limited, ignorant, and fundamentally evil, creature that cannot rule itself and who does not know any better, has no access to wisdom, no access to gnosis. We are the ones who we are the snakes of wisdom that bring the forbidden fruit to humanity, trusting them with this gift of the gods.
Absolutely. And so, that reminds me of something else that you wrote about in here. Oh yeah, here. They thought this city could only have been made for gods. They called it Teotihuacan. This does not mean city of the gods, as many say. It means the city from which gods are made.
Yes.
Can you elaborate a little bit on what that means?
The structure of Teotihuacan is it has a plan of a divine architecture where if you walk through the city as an initiatory temple and you go through specific shocks as you move along, something changes in you. And so they use the city to train the sacred warriors, train them to become dreamers, stalkers, warriors of the heart. And by the time they're done with that process, they have gone through what we used to call the king-making process, where a new consciousness and a new entity has now taken over this vehicle, and so a god is now walking on this planet, on this earth, and the city itself was made for that purpose and
So,
with that in.
so you're saying the city, Teotihuacan, the whole city was built and structured as a sort of map of the initiatory process?
Exactly. It is a map of the initiatory process, a map of the awakened individual, and a map of the cosmos in that sense. So the human being as when he's guided through that, is going through an actual initiation as we know them, where you participate in a story. All external initiations, Masonic style and whatnot, are pretty much that. You become the candidate, and there is a dialogue that has been preset in a series of shocks that are supposed to embed a story. This story becomes a blueprint for the consciousness that, even whether you apply it or not, resides in you, and it becomes an unconscious guiding light through the passage of life. If applied consciously, it would bring many insights and teachings and changes your life. So the city itself is made to impregnate in your bones, in your soul, in your nervous system, the passage through the pathway of the dead, the heart of the labyrinth, and then the sun and the moon, and uniting the two, become a complete human being, attain to the totality of yourself.
So this also reminds me of. Are you familiar with the Temple of Man or Temple of Luxor?
Yes.
Yes, with Schwaller de Lubitz and the whole esoteric Egyptology thing. So, it reminds me of that, because that's the whole thesis of that book by de Lubitz, is that the temple at Luxor was built as a map of the soul and the initiatory process as you move through it. And there's lots of other examples of this in ancient civilizations that we could talk to. But
well, the pyramid started around the same time in human history. So the pyramids at Teotihuacan, the pyramids at Giza, evolved around the same time in communities that, according to what we think now, had nothing to do with one another. But it's, this is kind of a hint that there was some sort of contact between these civilizations.
Yeah, that's where I was going. That's where I was going with this. Is what do you think about that question? Because that's a big question. Was there contact between these civilizations? Did it start on this side and move over? Did it start on the other side and move over, or did it start in a totally different place before that and descend descend out onto both of them at the same time. What are your personal thoughts on that?
Well, there are only about six basic major civilizations that seem to start out of nothing. Okay, most other civilizations you can trace where they came from, but each of the ones that start right at the beginning of civilization tell the story of an individual that came down and taught people how to plant the earth, how to create temples, how to pray, how to govern, all those things, how to be civilized. And in Egypt you have Hermes. In India and Nepal you have Shiva. Here in the American continent you have Quetzalcoatl, the plumed serpent. A great civilization starts out of that, and lingua franca starts out of that. Each one of these have developed a system of alchemy, a system of magic, a system of attainment that has endured the test of time by transforming itself and its mythology throughout the ages, right? So whether they come from a common place, as in the legend of Atlantis, for example, which many of them have in common. The stories exist here in the Americas as well as in the Middle East and in Europe, or whether it comes from a circle of humanity, which would be more like the higher consciousness of the egregore of humanity that is guiding humanity to its own evolution, or another word to say it is that each one of us has a magical aspiration to wake up from the fog, the mental fog of the world. It is inherent in each of us, and in every one of us there is this inner whisper, a voice that guides us through this. It leads us to read this book, to go meet that person, to go through this ordeal, right? And whether you listen to it or try to quell it because it's interrupting your the fun that you're having in your ordinary life, that's up to the individual. But we all start with that certain something that calls us. So that certain something, I see it in humanity as the inner circle of humanity. And those who tap into that, dedicate their lives to it, and perfect their instrument, which is to say their mind, their body, their actions, to be in alignment with that inner circle. They become the initiates and the teachers of humanity that has brought us all that. So I see the beginning of all of these civilizations to be the same source, which would be the part of humanity that is guiding the species into its own evolution. Okay. It's really secondary to me, interesting historically, but secondary, whether there was an actual place where a civilization was developed, and out of this civilization it broke into several. To me, that's very likely to be the case, logically speaking. But for my purposes, it doesn't matter if it's an actual civilization that predated the other six, or if it is more of a Aristotelian telos, or an aim, something that we are working towards. Because I think that is where we need to put our efforts into becoming the the real human being. Which, by the way,
Right.
when you were talking about Plato and Aristotle, the Socratic dialogue begins with that question. How do you become a good human being? How do you become wise? And that's when this whole deployment of Western philosophy begins. We are seeking to become a human being. The process of creation is not over. We are responsible for finishing that. So I'm less interested in where we came from and more interested in how are we going to complete this task.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. But that essential question of who I am and how can I become something, it always seems to open up this door to also the question of why am I here, right? There's like this connecting this connecting of the self throughout time. So that's like because I think when you in ordinary life we're accustomed to seeing time unfolding in a certain kind of a compartmentalized kind of way, and part of the initial beginning to see beyond that is beginning to see time in a different sort of continuum that extends infinitely in some sense. You mentioned Quetzalcoatl, and that reminded me of something else that you talked about, and I have a quote here for you too. But Quetzalcoatl wanted to make the ritual literal by pulling out the heart of a victim and sacrificing it to the sun god in exchange for magical powers. He wanted to bring rain for the crops. He said the gods are displeased, they will accept our gift of blood, and they will bring safety. In other words, he used the excuse every empire has used. We have a bomb, get slaves, etc., in order to preserve our way of life. Quetzalcoatl, the ruler at that time, was against human sacrifice, but he lost the political battle. When the population was facing hunger and lack of rain, he was accused of being ineffective, of being an ascetic lost in meditation.
Yeah.
So this whole passage, we're talking about these are like the principles. It's like the principles or the forms going through this process of definition and separation, but it's played out through people.
Yeah.
It's played out through civilization. So
Yep.
so this is why this is one reason to say that it's not as important which one it is. What's important is you see the pattern.
You see the patterns, and it's
Playing
a
out.
pattern, as Joseph Campbell said, the mythology, the history of a myth, the adventure that the myth takes you through is relevant to your personal life. We are making that decision every single day of our lives. And you see in the spiritual marketplace 1,000 examples of people using spiritual force to have a better dream. Okay? Do this to live better, to have less problems, to have less enemies, to be more comfortable. Basically, to have a more comfortable sleeping state.
Mm-hmm.
It takes the courage of the warrior to use, if at all, to use your spiritual gift to give yourself some interesting problems, right? To keep you on your toes, to be awake,
Mm-hmm.
to have a challenge so that you cannot just rest and go to sleep. The dynamic between Quetzalcoatl and Tezcatlipoca is that they are both descendants of the same being. Quetzalcoatl is known as the white Quetzalcoatl. Tezcatlipoca is the dark Quetzalcoatl, and Tezcatlipoca means smoky mirror. Okay? So it's like the deity seeing itself, but seeing a smoky mirror. It is the human consciousness, unaware of its own divinity, but quite aware of its own power. So it's the pure power that is not guided by the light of wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
The practice of the ritual of human sacrifice is a powerful magical process where the heart, the Sahasrara chakra, I'm sorry, the Anahata chakra, becomes exposed to the divine light of the sun, right? And the sun devours it. It's an offering to the supreme consciousness of the Sun Absolute. This sacrifice means it's really referring to the crossing of the abyss in magical parlance, is to allow that single point of entity of Hadith to dissolve in the desert, right, and allow the Godhead instead to inhabit one's body and one's consciousness. That was human sacrifice. The attainment of great magical technologies was something that have brought sometimes destructions to Egypt, to the Nahuas here in the Americas, because they use this technology to affect the external world only. So what they did, it was the last civilizations of Toltecs after thousands of years of having these schools of magic all over the continent. A few of them developed this technology where they would actually open the thoracic cavity by the area where Manipura chakra would be, and reach into the heart, pull it out while it was still beating, and then offer it to the sun god, all in the name of the goddess of death, in exchange for food, protection, rain, that sort of thing. Seacatl, the last incarnation of Quetzalcoatl, was like a Hamlet type figure. Okay, a deeply sentimental, religious. He was an ascetic. He would take mushrooms and go up to the mountain and not rule, not solve the problems. That got him kicked out, got him expelled. And when that city of Tula won that battle, then we don't hear from them after that. The next time we know anything about them is when the Aztecs came down from the north. They had established the city of Tenochtitlan, and they started the great Aztec Empire. Okay, the Toltecs were pretty much gone. There were a few pockets here and there, but the civilizations that they had helped create was gone. They found the city of Teotihuacan already in ruins, 200 years after the onset of human sacrifice in that region. They adopted the rituals themselves, so the Aztecs continued with that practice. But Seacatl, he did three things. One is he distributed his men and women of knowledge throughout the four corners of the world with the charge to maintain the knowledge of the Toltecas and to pass it on from teacher to student in small groups, right? Second, he founded the last city-state in Cuscatlan. It was called Cuscatlan, or the land of the jewel, and that is in El Salvador. And the third thing he did is that he is said to have left on a carpet made of serpents to the east, right? That's metaphorical in so many ways, but he went to the east and he promised that he would come back to get rid of of human sacrifice. He said the year in which he was going to come back. It's the year was known as the year one of Seacatl in the Mayan calendar. That was the year the conquistador Hernan Cortés came over, and he looked like the descriptions of Quetzalcoatl, white with a beard and seemingly magical powers. So he was seen and received as an incarnation of Quetzalcoatl, and he came over and he destroyed the Aztec Empire, right, and therefore ending with the practice of magical ritual sacrifice.
Yeah. Wow, that's amazing. So the other thing about this story, about the rift happening over human sacrifice, and Seacatl, right? Is that it? Seacatl, that's the manifestation of Quetzalcoatl, who's like going through this. He's rebelling against this, saying, no, you don't have to commit sacrifice. Well, two things. For one, it's like what we were talking about earlier about the distinction of the philosopher king, because Tetzalcoatl, I always get that name. I always have trouble with that name.
The tongue twister.
Right, it's a total tongue twister. He says he's using the power for control, right? For controlling of basically the state mechanism and the organization of the state. And there's such a great metaphor for like the world that we live in right now. How about the road to hell is paved with good intention? Every power, centralized authority has like this is for the good of everyone, but behind the scenes there's this horrible death and destruction and sacrificing of humanity that's like taking place for it. And
every major religion, every empire,
right,
has the same story. Every police state has the same story. We're doing this for your good because we have the power. We know how to administer it.
Yeah.
If we give it to you, to the people, you're going to not do any. You won't know how to rule yourselves.
Right.
That is the practice of human sacrifice.
Right. Right, and it's kind of a perversion of the sort of natural. There's a natural sort of elitism of consciousness, I think, and that it's something that goes to the few, right? It doesn't. It's like the many like strive and move, and then the few come to this point, and they sort of are de facto, without force, are leaders of humanity because they're leading the bigger picture of this. This is kind of like the idea of the inner circle. That's opposed to like a twisted, a natural concept of elitism is where there's a group that simply exercises power over humanity, not to help it move to the next stage of conscious evolution, but rather to exploit it and keep it in a mechanical cycle, in a kind of cannibalistic, self-consuming sort of cycle. And then when Seacatl walks away from this, that the pattern of him walking away from this and saying, no, you don't, I'm not going to participate in it. It's for one thing, it's kind of Luciferian, right? It's like Lucifer like walking away from it, but it's also an emulation of Zarathustra. One of the stories about Zarathustra, he was protesting the animal sacrifice that was going on in the proto-pagan Baal worshipping cults that really are what El came out of. The character Yahweh came out of like cults like that. Yeah. And Zarathustra was protesting against it, saying, no, you don't have to like sacrifice 1 million animals and torture them and make life really horrible for them. It's unnecessary. And so he protested against that. And so that was kind of the original pattern of him. He was like kind of ostracized for this and kind of had to wander around on his own for a while. So that's fascinating to me reading what you presented here, because I see all these same patterns, these universal patterns occurring.
Yeah. No, it is, and they're perfect metaphor for the journey that one has to take away from the mob of the world and away from the mob that tells you that somebody else has the power, not you. Is the mob is all these voices that tell you that the government is the leader of the nation. No, it's not. They are our servants. We have put them there. And I don't care if it's an army, if it's a religion, if it's a pope, anyone, any of them hold power because we have consciously or unconsciously agreed to keep them there in power.
Mm-hmm.
But as a simple human being, none of them have that capacity or that power. It is a matter of regaining that and becoming one's own philosopher king. Walk away from the need to feel safe. There is a nice story that I tell, not in this book. It's part of the Popol Vuh, or the sacred book of the Nahuas, or the Maya Quiche. There is a story of a time when humans were given fire, but they didn't know how to make it and how to conserve it, right? And so one of the sun gods of the times, not the sun itself, but a solar god, sent their servants and their minions, and they told the different tribes, well, I'm going to give you fire so that you can be warm, cook your food, and be safe, right, against predators. But in exchange, you have to obey me, you have to kneel before me, obey me, and you have to open your chest, pull out your hearts, and give them to me. Okay, and so do this human sacrifice, and I'll take care of you. There was one tribe that was visited by, it says, by one of the lords of Xibalbá. Xibalbá is the underground city, and is the one I took us through in the last telling that you participated in. In this underground city used to be ruled by the lords of Xibalbá, which would be like the fallen angels. And now there is only chaos because it has no ruler, right? But one of the lords there was still walking on the earth, and he showed up to this tribe and he said, don't give yourself in slavery. Say no. I will help you steal the fire from the volcano god. And so he did. He taught them how to steal it and how to use it. And so they refused to give in to human sacrifice and refused to obey the slave god, and instead they followed the advice of the fallen one, the Luciferian figure. Seacatl, when he left in exile to the east coast of Mexico, he settled in the peninsula of Yucatan. And there is still there an observatory that where he used to meditate a lot. It's an observatory from where you can see the stars, and especially it's aligned to Venus in the horizon. So they also consider Venus to be a fallen star, one that's always hovering. So again, his lineage is pretty much Luciferian in many ways. Yeah.
Wow, that's fascinating.
The mythology, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's intense. And so you mentioned you mentioned this all in relation to the last telling that I heard, and so that was in Portland in this last April, and I saw you there, and I saw you do the telling again, and it was different than the first time because you had some musicians with you.
And musicians with me.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about that. Tell us how that whole transition occurred with bringing in other people participating like that.
Well, Amy contacted me after the telling last year and said, we would like to collaborate with you. And right after that, I had started, when she contacted me, the new series of tellings where I am collaborating with a different artist on each one. So I have one with a vocal artist. I have one with dancer, and one even with a painter. While I'm doing a telling, he's creating a painting, right? And in this case, we had those four magicians and musicians who were improvised. Everything was improvised. There was they just had to connect with me, and I took them in this journey, and they created this magical carpet of sound in which we can move. So
Yeah, no, it was absolutely amazing. I mean, I was just completely pulled into the whole world that was being brought into being there. Um, is there recordings of any of this?
I just I got an email from Amy, one of the musicians, just yesterday actually,
Okay.
telling me that there's a strange hum all throughout, and it was all lost. Like we couldn't use any of that.
Oh no.
But we have a redundant recording, so I do have a recording.
Oh, okay,
And
cool.
sending it to her. We want to put it together,
Well, that's
yeah,
awesome. Well,
and bring it out.
so it's going to be available. People will be able to check it out.
Yeah, it's gonna be available soon. And at some point, it's one of my long-term projects to pull together all the tellings in one volume, because the poetry that comes out of the telling is it's rather interesting. Not just the not just the poetic value of it, but when I look at the manuscript of a telling, I encounter a lot of things that I had no idea I had said there. A lot of formulas, keys, insights that I did not consciously have. It's a guide for myself, even as for anyone else. Sometimes I hear a term that I have never known, and I have to look it up, research it, and it's illuminating.
Hmm.
And so it is a code and a cipher that is guiding me as much as it is a voyage, a shamanic voyage into the other worlds.
So, talking about like trying to get to like these deeper levels of consciousness, there's
Mhm.
another passage I wanted to read from your book here, when you say we begin to concentrate the attention of that child to this world with our teachings and what we allow the child to see, and the world is thus consolidated. The way this happens is physical, by pruning and by getting rid of neural connections. There is constant pruning for 5 to 7 years. The baby begins to eliminate parts of his brain because he has to have what is necessary in this world. So you're talking about how through this process of indoctrination, we actually, and I like that term, pruning and eliminating parts of the brain is what you're doing. It's like you're trained to close off these
Yeah,
certain abilities that you have within
yeah,
the conscious mind.
yeah. We don't really learn as children. We don't learn by creating neural connections. The connections are there, right? It's by eliminating some that we develop the patterns of thought, of consciousness, and the patterns that allow us to focus our attention in something and to find meaning in the world. The meaning is given by the education of the tribe. It's through this that we learn to know how to behave around people, animals, how to use things around us. You know, I see this cup as a cup because I've been trained to do so. And I do it automatically, right? I don't have to think about it being a cup. The magician is taking this fact of consciousness of the brain, and may turn this into the magical cup, all right? And then use it ritualistically, creating changes in the psyche and therefore in the perception of the magician. But this is the magician attempting to take ownership of the process. As children, we do it because we trust. We are hardwired to trust the adults around us. They teach us our language. They teach us what the world is all about. And once the moment that we begin to behave in the world in expected ways, that's when we become part of the tribe. That's when the adults consider us to be a formal member, and begin to expect more of us and all that.
So it's another thing in your writings that makes me think of Reich, Wilhelm Reich. This is where he really emphasizes how through childhood indoctrination we get closed off to things, to higher energies and stuff like that. And the other thing, and you mentioned this earlier, the idea that the structure of government versus the structure of, say, organized religion is essentially the same structure, in terms of like power and force and everything like that. That's another thing that Reich hipped me to, right? Because a lot of people have trouble with that. A lot of people, that's a big challenge to be able to see that. And it's like even our society, we have this idea of church and state, which already sets up your mind in a binary like kind of way to think, well, you got to be on one side or the other.
Right.
You're always on one side or the other, and it takes this big leap, and usually only through shocks, right? People receive shocks, perhaps accidentally. Maybe if they have the right sort of context or ideas around them, then they can like start to formulate what a different world, could look like, or what the real world, actually looks like.
Yeah. Yeah, and there is no way to get there by the institutions of education around us. No way. You have to overcome the seduction of the world, and you have to be able to move outside those systems that have you trapped. How you find a door out of that? Well, in the first place, something had to have gone wrong in your education. Okay? If you had a perfect childhood and your psyche was formed perfectly to specification, and you never have a shock that dislodges your sense of reality, you have no hope. You're going to be stuck through the duration of your lifetime, just like an animal is. An animal is not disrupted. It's the patterns are solid, okay, of formation. So yeah, we have to become a little bit off kilter. And most magical and shamanic processes are consciously self-induced forms of neurosis, of anxiety, or even psychosis that you do in a systematic and controlled way that would allow you to take on different personas, to invoke a deity and become it for a while and see the world as the deity sees the world. But a well-formed psyche that is unmovable would not allow you to take this leap outside the conditioning of the city.
And so, in one sense, is working with systems like shamanism or occultism or magic, ways of creating shocks or creating opportunities for shocks
Creating
in a controlled
disruption.
manner.
Yeah, disruption of the sleep patterns that the world is counting on.
And so, why do you think that's necessary? Why is it necessary that we have to create shocks like that? Why don't we just, as a natural process of being a human being on Earth, why don't we just naturally go through this process?
Well, we do naturally go through this process. The body is built in with some of the shocks, the release of hormones at a certain time, the changes in the body, the different faculties that are developed are all designed to create a new way of expression in the world. The problem is that we have developed this powerful mind and this powerful civilization that is what produces education, language, arts. It produces a way of looking at each other, right? But we are in an evolutionary process. We are not done. If we were done, then it's okay to stay as we are. But we're seeking to go beyond where we find ourselves. And part of going beyond where we find ourselves is to not be satisfied with the answer to who we are. Every religion wants to tell you who you are. And every city, every state tells you who you are too and how you have to behave. But we are seeking that. We are philosophers at heart. And we are trying to find out who the fuck am I really, right? And this question is it's a revolutionary stance that even though my family told me and the priest told me and my teachers told me and my religious and my spiritual teachers also tell me who I am, I continue to ask. And if I continue to ask, it's because I have found all definitions lacking in a way, and I'm trying to find the underlying real truth about myself. So that's an evolutionary move that has to disrupt and dislodge. Okay? Now, an enlightened society would allow that, would have a built-in allowance to that. Take science, for example. Science is a beautiful development of a system that, if it's working well, it's making itself obsolete over and over. It has, in the scientific method, the force and power to continue to question, to continue to investigate, and to redefine the assumptions over and over. And a true scientist would never come to the idea that he already knows and already understands. He would know that he has a working hypothesis, and that's all, right? Dogmas, on the other hand, want to quickly come to a quick explanation. Okay, it is like this because that's what God wants.
Yeah.
Whatever. And of course, we have dogmatic scientists, but those are not real scientists. But science as a system is a wonderful example of that. A constitutional republic is an attempt to do that too. And that's why it's so interesting and loose and reinterpretive, right? But that's what we are as human beings. We have to constantly reinterpret ourselves and rule ourselves in that sense. Everything that wants to make me static and fixed is against my evolution. It wants me to remain as I am. And so we have this fight in us. And I think that fight is a good thing.
Are people born with souls?
In the lexicon that I bring in this book, I speak of the soul as something that we build, as that we can build. We have the eternal sentience, right? Like, and you have the force of spirit, the breath of God, as it were. Mixed with matter, you create a human being that then gives rise to a mind. Now, the mind is there only when you have a physical organism. When you die, the mind dissolves as well. But the sentience that is behind the mind, that is observing this simulation that the mind is creating about the world, is eternal, and is part of an eternal, immutable being who does not need to evolve and does not need to change at all. But it does need a vehicle to be able to have an experience. Okay. The human body is a vehicle that we use to have an experience in this world. The soul is a vehicle that we create with a more refined matter in which we can have an experience in the higher dimensions. So you have to form it. And when you form it, you can survive the death of this body and continue to have an experience in higher planes of existence.
So, so here's another question in relation to that. What is the fundamental nature? What do you believe is the fundamental nature of man?
Well, for one, I think that the human being is the being who questions his own nature, his own fundamental nature, and it is at the core of who we are to investigate this question. No other creature I see questions this. Okay, we have to. And we have attempted many answers, but we continue to question. So this questioning, I think, is fundamental. And at the same time, we continue to look within and to explore without. That I have seen in the human being a constant truth in all cultures, in all genders, and in all manifestations. And we can call this the spiritual quest. We can call this the God's consciousness trying to find itself. But however we call it, we are seeking to know who we are. And in knowing who we are creating ourselves.
So that's all. So, and you think those are all good things?
I think that those are fundamental things. It has led to all the strife in history, and it has led to all the wonderful things in history. But it is precisely in this history, like Hegel would say, that we find our true essence. Like there's no human being devoid of history. Right? Socrates would say that there's no separation between being human and the communities we form.
Mm-hmm.
I think Hegel goes further than that, and by seeing the actual historical development of humanity as the essence of the human being. So I don't know how to define the good in this case, good versus evil. I wouldn't put it in that kind of balance.
So, well, do you believe in original sin? Do you believe man is born with some wickedness or some indebtedness to?
I wish I could have an original sin, a sin that no one else has committed, but I just have to copy everyone's sin.
So if you don't have original sin, you're just not being creative.
You're just not trying hard enough, So pick the best sins that you can, hold on to them. I don't believe in that type of duality. Okay, the type of original sin that makes you feel ashamed of yourself. I don't. I do use the idea of the sleeping state and the awakening from the sleeping state. And so, in this sense, what others call sin, I see in that simply a being seduced by the sleeping state, and that has many gradations of hold
Mm-hmm.
on my consciousness, and I see the awakening as an independence of the sleeping state, uh, a purity of detachment from it, and in that I would see the good, in a sense, but not as sinful, but rather as functions of sleep and awakening.
Yeah. I agree with that for the most part. I think the doctrine of original sin and that whole concept is really just used to control people again,
It is used to control, yeah,
right, to
yeah.
coerce and control people.
I like the mythologies, the ideas that help you be free and to own yourself. Yeah.
Yeah.
And of course I see all notions as simply tools in the tool belt of language
Yeah.
of the mind. So I'm never advocating anything. Okay, this is the truth, and that is a lie. I don't see it that way either. I see all thoughts to be tools, and what do you do with a tool? That's the only question. Are
Right.
you constructing a work of art? Are you constructing a better technology? Or are you misusing them? Are you
Right.
using like an idiot?
Yeah. So, I mean, that what people end up doing with the resources. I mean, that's another thing. But when I'm thinking of fundamental nature, I'm thinking of this. I'm thinking of how we come into the world, right?
Yeah.
And I agree with you. I think for the most part, that that fundamental nature of man, it has to do with consciousness. Like Aristotle said, it's reason, the fact that we can like reason and we can think, and I can like think about myself, and that I also want to be free and independent individual. My initial state, my fundamental state is I really want to be a philosopher king. I want to be free and have like self rulership, and I think that's in its essence good. In the same way that if I have a bird in my hand, well, I could keep it here in a cage all the time, but what he'd like to do is if I just let him free, let him go out there and let him free, and I think that's good, in the sense that it would be not as good to keep him locked up. And you can come up with like lots of philosophical reasons, but it's just something that you like sense in your heart. But to bring science into it, because we talked about science and the place of science a little bit, and this is the same question: is nature versus nurture? If we're not good or evil, does that mean we just come into the world as a blank slate?
Well, we don't. We're not blank. The fact that we have a human system, a human nervous system, we already have cellular memory. We have the genetic uh, code of all generations before us, okay, and other species that were before us. And we're born in a world, in a society. Uh, how we are seen and the language we speak, how we relate to the world is going to pretty much give me a limited set of possibilities of the type of mind and personality I'm going to develop. With those, I have to build something like an artist. So no matter what, I am an artist that is creating an expression of this world. And I am creating myself also within the context of this world. but the expression that I can create with this is infinite. See how much I put into that, how much I fine tune my faculties, and how much honesty and truth do I put into my artistic creation. That makes a difference. Okay. Am I ruled by cowardice? Am I ruled by convenience? Am I ruled by false ideas? That will determine a lot what I end up creating of this life.
Yeah.
And in that, we're all equal. Any of us can decide to drop the fears and work, become a warrior of the heart, as we call it.
Yeah.
And that's what makes a difference.
Yeah. Well, that's excellent. So, um, if people read your book, Teachings of a Toltec Survivor, will this help
If
them learn how to
people,
become?
yeah, can you say that again?
Will this help people learn how to find that state?
Well, it would only help those who are already called to it. Right? Reading the book, and you could testify to this, I think, makes you feel something. It's not just a mental luguration. There is something that is happening. This book is an artifact that gives you a shock. Okay? How you respond to this shock. That response is the artistic endeavor.
Mm-hmm.
It would. It doesn't have a dogma that people need to believe. I don't have any dogmas. I don't have any beliefs to give to people. The book is a work of art, and so it provokes a reaction. It's not a how to do this or why to believe that. It's a series of storytellings that snake its way into your consciousness and provoke a response from you. That is the value of this book, just like that's the value of any art.
Yeah.
A Toltec is an artist, fundamentally. And we speak with the heart, we dialogue with the heart, and that's what I give in this book, an honest dialogue with the heart.
Yeah.
And that's all it promises.
No, I think that's absolutely accurate. That's been my experience of reading this. You touch on so many different things. You bring in, there's all. I mean, you're an awesome storyteller. First of all, just in real time, but this comes through in the book too. And so the patterns that are revealed in it, and a lot of them, I think, are reflected in the patterns that we've been discussing tonight. They echo of that ancient. Deep tradition and teaching that gets reflected in things like in things like Gurdjieff, and things like the ancient mythology, of the Aztecs and the Egyptians, and Aristotle, Pythagoras. All these things we've been touching on tonight are all reflected in it, and so I think it's a really excellent book. I think you did a really good thing with this.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it's a result of three paths that I have worked with in my life. An initiate of Tantra, of Nahualismo, and of magic, and what I present is not oh yeah, this is what these people believed and this is what they teach. No, what I present is myself. I am the result. I am the product. I am the survivor of this Toltec lineage. And so I present myself. Right? This is not a book about what the ancients believed or what so-and-so said. It's about what I'm doing right now with this. And that's who I am, and that's what I present, honestly, in the book.
Excellent. All right, man. Well, keep doing that magic that only you can do. And thank you for dropping in and speaking with us tonight. Any last words for the people?
Oh, just thank you so much, Paul, for inviting me here, and thanks to everyone that's listening. And in the immortal words of Pedro, if you buy my book, all your dreams will come true.
That's awesome. Well, you
That's
heard
Pedro,
it.
that's from Napoleon Dynamite.
Oh,
Actually,
okay. That's awesome. Hey,
he
you
said,
know what? That's
if you
funny you
vote for
mentioned
me,
Napoleon
you're
Dynamite. You mentioned Napoleon Dynamite because last night I saw Revenge of the Nerds.
Oh yeah,
You
yeah.
remember that movie from like 1982 or
Yes.
whatever, 83? And
Yes.
and there's this character in it named Poindexter who's like
Yes.
real nerdy. And he's
Yes.
basically, this is where they got Napoleon Dynamite from. Napoleon looks exactly like this guy. And there's a scene where they're having a party and Poindexter starts dancing. And I'm like, and he dances all funny, you know, and it's like, oh, this is totally where they got the Napoleon Dynamite thing from.
Interesting. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah. All right.
yeah, so that's an interesting topper for this whole conversation, and somehow makes it even more mystical. People want you to go, if you can go see Coyote the Blind speaking somewhere and giving his telling, you've got to go see it because there's nothing else like it. Watch for it. Do you have a website where people can check it out, check you out?
I do. You know, I have a blog at coyotetheblind.blog. You can check it out there, or a website, coyotetheblind.com.
Awesome.
I recommend the blog. I'm posting almost every day, and you get to access a lot of material from there.
Yeah, that really is true. I follow you on Twitter, and I see a lot of the stuff coming off of it, and it's all really good stuff. Mm-hmm. So, all right. Well, we will put your contact information and your website and your blog. We'll put all of that in the show notes for this episode so people can check it out. And I want everyone out there to pick up the teachings of a Toltec Survivor and read it, because it will make you a smarter person and it will help you keep the dark fires burning.
And sexier. Everyone who has read it is sexier.
And sexier too, even better.
Oh yeah.
To keep that fire burning as well. All right.
All right, Paul.
Awesome.
Thank you so much.
All right.
Take care.
Take care. All right.